It is now my pleasure to introduce Paul West, who will be teaching you more about this exciting initiative and how it came to be. Take it away, Paul.
All right. Thanks, Daria, and hello, everyone. As Daria mentioned, I am Paul West. And I'm going to be sharing my screen right here. Right, everybody should be able to see this. Um, as Daria had mentioned, I'm going to be speaking about a newer initiative here at Project Drawdown. And it's focused at the nexus of climate and people and nature. Some additional housekeeping is I'm, as is probably already aware, a person who stutters. So at times it may it's take me a bit, but I'll get there. But if at times it sounds a little choppy, it's not you, it's me, and that's okay. And then also, this was originally it's scheduled for a few weeks ago, and so just thank you for signing up for second time. So I'm going to start out with a little story about how a lot of our ideas were influenced. For a handful of years, while I was at the University of Minnesota, a number of colleagues of mine worked with some people at USAID on a number of projects that were all focused on sustainable uh, intensification of agriculture. And that work, it was done in Senegal, which is showing here, and in Bangladesh and in Cambodia as well. And as the project had wrapped up about a year and a half ago, there were some additional funds at the end of the project on our team, and I asked if we could use that additional funds to approach this issue of food security in a different way. So one of the reasons that we had done that is because um, food security and farming is tied into a number of aspects of human well-being. It's not just about what is grown on the farms, obviously. And a number of years ago, we did an analysis that it summarized what are the impacts of climate solutions on human well-being in low and middle income countries. And for a lot of climate solutions, we found that there are a number of direct benefits and a number of indirect that are well is documented in the literature. If you're interested in seeing that, there's a report that we have on the website, which was a synthesis of 400 or 500 articles that are on this topic. So in terms of food security, like in Senegal, most of the people in the country are farmers, especially women, and yet all the farming in the country is pretty tough in that there is a wet season and a dry season that's extremely dry, and if the all the planting is not is timed well at the start of the season, you have a risk of losing most of the crop over the course of the season. And because it's hard to do a lot of farming, most of the food security is tied to the amount of uh, uh, income a household has, because about 70% of all the food that is eaten in Senegal is uh, imported from other areas. Other issues that are tied into the food system is in rural areas, a little more than half of the people lack access to electricity. About a third are lacking access to clean water, and much of the cooking is done over open fires, which has a big impact on health because of all the soot and smoke. So with that, it really started to Ms. gel in our mind and what we had intended to do with US AID, which probably is not a agency anymore, unfortunately, is we had intended that project, and we are doing it now at Project Drawdown, is to ask how could we take a similar approach to what we were asked to help out with in Senegal, so that we could do it for, in theory, every country in the world. So, sort of how we got here is at Project Drawdown. We started as a climate uh, a, an organization that focused on climate solutions, not on the problem, how to solve it. And we had worked some on nature as well, but that it was usually through the lens of how does protecting and restoring nature, or loss of it impact the our climate. And then a few years ago, as I mentioned, we then started to also look at um, how does climate solutions impact people's lives. So in both, where is it a win-win and where is it a trade-off? And the thing is that while most individuals and agencies and organizations that work in this space acknowledge that there is a connection among all three. In practice, most of the assessments or planning or funding or policy or action really happens in silos. Um, and as a result of that, or in part as a result of that, we aren't on track to meet a number of goals that are set on climate, such as cutting emissions in half each decade. We're making a lot of progress. We're not there yet. In nature, there is a short-term goal of 30% of the lands and waters are under a form of protection in the year 2030. That's called 30 by 30, if some of you heard of that. And then with the sustainable development goals, which were set to be accomplished in 2030, well, our world has made a lot of progress on a few. Others are lagging, or as a result of COVID, have started to slide backward. So as a result of this, that we are treating each of these areas independently, and we aren't on track to meet any of the goals. We we think it will certainly help to is look at the world from a different a perspective. I mean, obvious things. All of us are alive on the planet. All other species, ecosystems We have a single climate. So how do we work across these areas? So this is a simple just uh, overlay of what a nexus might oop, uh, is look like. And while you could interpret a nexus as just what is the uh, overlap, such as this, if we just are focusing on what is the overlap for a win-win or a triple win, we will not accomplish our goals for any of the three. Um, so instead, we have to look at it from a perspective and develop a set of solutions that really address all the needs or challenges, opportunities for like all of climate, all of nature, and be assessing where are those, where are the biggest opportunities to work on climate, on nature, that also improve human well-being. So I'm going to go back to Senegal for a little bit, although this is not a picture that is in Senegal. Um, but while growing more food on land, yes, is important for food security. What has been shown over and over is that access to electricity is really a gateway to a number of other benefits, whether it's electrification for healthcare. Uh, Electrification opens up new opportunities for a lot of businesses and education as well. So what we had done here was we looked at or used uh, this household level survey data, and instead of just looking at it from the abstract of what uh, electricity or solar has a benefit both in terms of climate and people, instead of just is looking at that in a general way, what we're starting to do now for all climate solutions and in different aspects of human well-being is mapping out where are, in this case, are the biggest needs for electrification, which are those areas in yellow and light green on the map here. So then, as a result of that, we did a simple modeling of or a simple like in quotes, modeling of what size of solar array would be needed to meet uh, uh, a set of needs that is enough electricity for a number of small appliances in each home and have electricity or backup for almost every hour of every day of every year. So we had done that. We then also looked at um, uh, where is access to clean cooking fuels, where is that uh, available or not? Um, because access to electricity opens up new ways of cooking food. Um, and it saves a lot of time, and most of the efforts to gather fuel wood every day, it largely falls on the shoulders, and that is literal, of women and girls. So as part of the analysis, we used some excellent work by others and mapped out across the country is if there is access to a cleaner fuel and that is used, how many hours each day it could be saved. So that's an issue of equality as health of the uh, indoor air quality. We also looked at uh, agroforestry as a means for uh, increasing the amount of certain types of food, offering shade for all the livestock in in the hottest parts of the day, and then also offering up more habitat for uh, other species of the world. So here's an image of a uh, agroforestry effort in Senegal. So as I mentioned before, you know, these issues are all interwoven. Um, and while I'm going to talk about all three issues again, in the next few slides, I'm going to highlight or I'm going to hone in on climate and nature. As I mentioned before, while there is a strong overlap, a lot of the planning, implementation, and funding and policy is largely is focused on one or the other. So they aren't independent, but the opposite is also not true. Is at least among some people, there is a perception that if we are protecting and restoring uh, biodiversity, that most of our climate challenge is also solved. But um, if you assess what are all the sources of impacts on climate and on nature, what you really see is that the overlap is really about a third or maybe up to a half. So when we're looking at nature-based solutions, there is a lot of win-wins, and certainly if you are working on access to a clean electricity or cooking, indirectly, of course, that has an impact on nature in terms of our climate or upcutting of fuel wood. But there are a lot of independent issues that are are harming our climate and nature. So, what is needed is we have to have a consistent sort of uh, interoperable way of looking at climate and nature and a set of solutions, which would allow us then to identify where are places in the world that a certain set of solutions could have more or less impact, since every uh, action isn't necessarily uh, is relevant or feasible to implement everywhere. But if we want to look at the overall of the win-wins, you know, I've already showed how we would map that out on indicators of human well-being. But what we've done at Project Drawdown is, you know, there is a set of goals that others have set, um, but is looking at like how at what rate is needed to meet a target of net zero or around there of of uh, of of greenhouse gas emissions. And then we also know that most of that work has to happen from reductions and not through uh, restoration and protection all of which are super important in the long run. But in the short term, we have to have a hyper focus on reductions of emissions. And we have a set of solutions that are organized around each a source of emissions. And then, but what we've lacked and are working on now is starting to map out where each solution is most applicable and what are the effects of those actions in those places. Nature, I realize it does have an N, although I don't have it in my slide. Apologies. Um, but the biodiversity community, which I have been or and still am a part of, has done an excellent job of identifying where are the places that are most important in terms of intact areas or opportunities for restoration to conserve all life on Earth. And while there are a number of actions and strategies, what we really want to aim to do is to is synthesize as well as do some new work. A lot of the efforts that are out there and put it into a common framework, which will allow us to identify opportunities for win-wins in different places in the world. So what we're doing now at Project Drawdown is in the past, we had identified a number of climate solutions and then had done the math and asked and assessed which set of solutions are going to have the biggest impact, and those and the most impactful ones are the circles there that are the largest. And while that was important, it and it highlighted that what is possible, it 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 didn't really help us identify where actions should take place in order to have the biggest outcome. So that's what we are working on now, and a number of solutions are going to be part of a new Explorer uh, tool or website that is launched in June of this year. All right, so how would we do this for work on protection as well as climate? And this is still a work in progress, but let's look at how we have done that for a set of solutions um, uh, on climate change. We have a nice essay that uh, Amanda Smith on our team had written about this, and is leading all of our assessment work along with a team of excellent fellows. But we are very explicit about a solution must have a material outcome. In this case, in terms of greenhouse gases. Um, but and so what that also means is that a policy or funding in our lexicon here is not a solution, it enables a solution, like a subsidy, say, on solar, enables action of installing solar arrays in some area. Also that each idea or a solution has to be available now. Just in that we don't have time to is wait for is something in the future. So our whole idea is to let's take action and scale up what is already available, knowing that we might need other solutions in the future, but any action that is not happening now and waiting, uh, it makes our problems a lot worse. Um, and I don't know if I need to cover this one all that much, but um, what we also have here is that a solution must be able to have an impact at a large scale, and what that would mean in terms of biodiversity would be, maybe there's a particular action or solution that works in a, a local area. Um, and while that's important for that as a niche, it might not be uh, as feasible for a broad spread implementation and impact. So as we are developing a set of solutions around around nature, what we're looking at is there will be a set of solutions that focus on reducing demand for land and water. So, say for example, agriculture now it covers about 40% of the uh, ice-free Earth. So, if you add up all of the pastures, that's about the size of Africa. If you add up all the croplands, that's about the size of South America. So we are already are using a couple of continents worth of land to grow our food. So what we eat and how it's produced and where it's produced has a huge impact on biodiversity and on climate. So say, for example, in this case of agriculture, it accounts for uh, 22% of all of global greenhouse gases. And about half of that is because of expansion of agriculture in the tropics, which has obviously huge impact on climate and on biodiversity. Also have a number of solutions that are a little bit are are more f- are more focused on protection of intact areas, and then is looking at where are there opportunities for uh, the restoration efforts. Here's an example of a pasture in Brazil in the Atlantic rainforest area. And then, as I mentioned, you know, um, huge amounts of land across the world are managed for agriculture as well as forestry. So certain types of activities on farmlands can improve the amount of food that is produced, as well as do it in a way that has a smaller amount of impact on climate and on nature. So what all this looks like eventually is that, say, a solution that is like uh, prescribed fire or a natural flow regime. Some of those are more um, relevant in a positive way, like if it's fire in savannas and grasslands, but in tropical forest, not so much. It's a threat. But in other places, it is a key a solution for uh, is maintaining uh, ecosystems. But if you look at coral reefs, the largest kind of overall impact on reefs is climate change and warming itself, but then certainly also water quality issues and overfishing as well. And what a set of solutions are like in in the coastal zones are also different and similar if you're looking at freshwater areas like on the Mississippi River, where I live or I'm near there. So if we have a set of solutions um for climate and nature and are able to assess what is the effectiveness of each solution and map that out over space, it then allows us to start to look at where are the win-wins and where are the trade-offs. So here's an example. So if you're looking at renewable energy, let's say it's is wind power, um, it can have a large impact on climate is in a positive way, especially those areas where most of the power is currently generated from coal or heavy fuels like oil. But it can have a negative impact on biodiversity, especially on birds. And for people, it has a positive impact as well, um, either in areas where you don't already have access to electricity, well, then it's a huge win. In other places, like in the US where I'm at, it can help improve air quality. So let's look at like how we might think through a uh, a solution. And so let's look at wind power, and we'll focus here in the US. So those areas that are in yellow and red are those places where at the height of a turbine, that how much power is um, available or possible at that elevation. And then we also need to look at what colleagues at the Nature Conservancy and others have done, where they've also then identified, well, where are the most important areas uh, for biodiversity, especially which ones might be impacted by additional wind or solar. And like if you look at these maps, where most of the wind is, is also the areas that are the most important flyways. And that makes sense because a bird that is flying 1,000 miles or a number of thousands miles, if you have a tailwind in the spring, it's easier, an easier flight. So, but then if we're looking at the impacts of climate or on climate, yes, wind energy is important and of value everywhere. But in terms of climate, in some places it will have more impact than others. So if you are adding more wind power on a grid that currently is mainly fired by coal or gas or oil, it'll have more of an impact on climate than in other areas where most of the power is currently from wind and solar and hydro. So our colleagues at Wattime have done a lot of work in this area. And what I just showed you on the map, this is maybe what it looks like in terms of an analysis. So if you remember on the map, most of the electricity in South Africa is from coal. So any additional amounts of wind or solar will have a very much of an outsized impact than if you're adding more wind or solar, say in Texas, which it might be a surprise to others, but a large fraction of the electricity in Texas is from wind and solar. So let's look at what this might look like on a map. So what we're seeing here is those areas that are in dark red are places where there is more of an impact on climate for each kilowatt hour or per unit of energy. So then if you start to have this information and where is the most opportunity in terms of where are the winds and also excluding areas that have a high impact on biodiversity. And then you can also add in this other element, which they've done at Wattime, is look at based on the amount of power that is generated and the source of it is what is downwind, it has an impact on air quality. And those areas in dark red are areas that if there is a shift in the types of power, can have an outsized impact in those areas. So like in this case, if there is wind and solar that are added in Wisconsin, where I live, well, that has a lot more impact, say, east of us than if you're adding wind and solar on the grid in Nevada, which for others outside the country is in the southwest area of the US. So then what we intend to do is to look at, is to assess and map out suitability and impact for about 100 solutions or so. And as part of that is looking at what or where are the win-wins or the trade-offs for climate and nature and people. So really what I've tried to highlight here is our approach, our current thinking, which is still in progress, and is looking at how do we identify a set of solutions that can not only address needs of climate and nature and people, but if we think about it as a system, that we believe it can accelerate our progress on these issues. So with that, I'll wrap up. And if you want to know more about what we're doing with Drawdown Nexus or all of our great work at Project Drawdown, please sign up for our newsletter. And with that, I will stop sharing my slides. And I'll try and do that.
Thanks, Paul. That was great.
Yeah.
Um, Thank you everyone for submitting your questions. We still have some coming in, but as we wrap up, Paul, I wanted to ask you, what is one major takeaway you want folks to remember from this conversation?
Um, I think there are, if I could, I'll have a couple. One of which is that not only can we accelerate our progress with a focus on the nexus, I would say if we are not doing that, we really aren't able to accomplish our goals on climate, on nature, or on people's lives. So while all of the problems are interwoven, at the same time, the opportunity is that most solutions are also interwoven. I'm gonna pause for a drink here.
While you have a drink, I will ask, what are examples of data sources that you lean on for this project, and what data and knowledge problems might be hindering the Nexus goals?
Um, well, it's a variety of data sources. Where possible, like with our work on climate and previous work that I and others on our team have done related to agriculture and food security, environment issues around the world, what we generally try and do, or as a first pass, is identify if there are sets of data that span the globe. And the reason we do that is because we want to have a standard approach of comparing across areas. And so if we have a data set, even if it's not the best at um, every single place, it allows us to look more broadly at what are the patterns and the opportunities. Um, but specifically is that we use a number of data sets that are focused on climate, on land cover, on land use change, uh, and range maps for a number of species. Um, we have data on the electrical grid. We have data on population. Uh, and in a number of countries, we have data that are the household survey uh, data that the US uh, Ph.D. had collected in the past. And I think those span 30 or 40 countries, mostly in Latin America, Sub-Saharan Africa, and South Asia. So with, it's the number of data sets, I don't know, it's more than 50, maybe 100. But it really aims to span kind of all sources of emissions in terms of climate. We want to have a set of data that spans a number of dimensions of human well-being. And on the nature end, which is we are just are getting more started on that, but is we want a set of data that looks at not only which areas are more intact now, opportunities in terms of restoration, maps of threats, um, yeah, a range of things. A lot, too, I'll say that. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there is short of data, but we're using quite a lot of data this as well. Okay. in your Venn diagram of climate, nature, and human, where do businesses, markets, and other actors fit, and how do they fit into the framework of
Hmm.
Nexus?
Yeah, that's great. Well, uh, is fortunately a number of foundations, investors, and companies and private citizens are very interested in and making uh, partic- are declaring or setting a number of goals for is cutting emissions, uh, improving people's lives, and being more nature positive, which is still a term that is popular now, but is poorly defined. But I think a process like this can help identify which solutions matter most where. And that's certainly not at all to say that every action everywhere isn't also important. Like in terms of climate, every uh, a ton of CO2 or equivalents of that, every uh, tenth of a degree, it all matters. It's just that there are some places that can really have an outsized impact. Um, yeah, I'll leave it at that.
And then to kind of build on that, how do you see, given our current political climate here in the US and how it might be affecting, how it is affecting other parts of the world, how can the Nexus framing help maintain momentum for action despite federal resistance?
Hmm. Yeah, I think, well, there are a couple ways to answer that. One is that we live on a big planet. So while we have a lot of influence on that in positive ways or in negative ways here in the US, there's a lot of great activity that's happening all around the world. So it doesn't all it just depend on us. I'm hoping that how things are now are more of a temporary a blip in the long run. Um, but I think it's also important that in some sectors like electricity, that while there certainly is an interest on a policy level, say in the US, of investing more in oil and gas and coal, um, while that is possible to set as a policy, most of the new electricity that's coming online in the US as well as around the world is from wind and solar. So that as a market is already sort of independent of of policy, and that's great. I mean, there are opportunities to have other policies and incentives to accelerate that uh, even faster. But in some cases, our market is already is leading a transition. Um, but that is not necessarily is the case, say, with deforestation, other impacts from agriculture, uh, cement production. So there are a number of still huge challenges that, in many ways, our market around the world is working against those. And so we have to find ways of creating more uh, triple wins in those cases.
Thank you. We have a question now about what role do ecosystem service markets play in this proposed solution system, specifically thinking about carbon markets and biodiversity credit markets.
Hmm. Yeah, excellent. Um, well, I'll start out with saying we are currently are working on a project with the Natural Capital uh, Insights, which is uh, a consulting sort of arm of the Natural Capital Project, who had pioneered a lot of this work on quantifying and mapping ecosystem services. What we've been doing in the US is looking at um, what is the mapping out, what is the current status of of carbon storage, of of the land's impact on water quality, on water quality, on water quantity as well, uh, and pollinator habitat. And then we're using that information to then look at, well, what would be the impact of implementing a climate solution or a biodiversity solution across the country, everywhere where it's applicable. And then that then allows us to start to look at where are places where with a change in management, it could have a big impact on say on carbon, or that also can help us look at, well, if there is not as much of a demand for ag land, like where might be the most effective areas to uh, is restore uh, our grasslands and savannas that are largely are gone today. So in terms of markets, um, what we're doing here certainly allows assessments of where, say, more carbon, it could become uh, stored in the system, or which areas around the world already have a lot of carbon in them. And that's mainly is the peatlands and tropical forests, and a few other areas of the world. Um, and then there has been a lot of work, especially in Latin America, where uh, uh, is land protection and management in watersheds has been funded by water utilities and and customers of those uh, water utilities. So I think there's a lot of examples out there, and our work can help identify like where some of the opportunities and trade-offs. This still doesn't get to though other important issues in the market or in say a carbon market. So like for example, a key thing is if there's a purchase of a credit, what is the guarantee that it's always where that amount of carbon is always going to be in the soil or the vegetation. So there's like a permanence issue. What I think is even, oh, not what I think, what I know is even harder is to assess, is this new activity, would that have happened in the absence of a payment? So that's an issue of additionality. And then there's also the issue is if you, which is referred to as leakage, but if you're doing an activity here, like a reforestation effort, is it leading to a problem in uh, another area? So I think that also just though also highlights while there is a place for a carbon market um, in terms of climate, it's important to know though and acknowledge that um, our forests and grasslands and rivers and reefs and coastlines all are providing a tremendous amount of service that really is the uh, a safety net for all of life on Earth. So while there are um, some challenges with carbon markets, um, I think some of that can be addressed for acknowledging and compensating for a whole range of ecosystem services, and not just a single one. It looks like I'm at time, so thanks everybody